All right, thank you for joining us here today at the Central Valley Geeks for this Kindle Fire charge port replacement. And we are looking at the disassembled Kindle Fire. This is the back housing of the Kindle. In this video, we're going to be removing the old charge port and replacing it with a new charge port. What you're looking at right there is the old port that's ready for removal. We're going to be adding some flux here to the pins, and we're going to go ahead and add some solder, some leaded solder to these pins to lower the melting point of the pin so that we can loosen them up. Then we're going to be flipping the board over and doing the same thing to the legs on the opposite side of the board. Here we are adding the leaded solder to the pin, as you can see. And once again, we just want to thank you for joining us here today at the Central Valley Geeks new YouTube channel, new YouTube channel. And we're so excited to have you here with us today. We are working very hard on creating content for your pleasure and looking forward to creating a lot more. One of the keys to doing this quickly and efficiently is to take your time, ensure you have good quality flux and good quality solder. This will enable the process to go a lot smoother. Make sure your soldering iron is kept clean. That way it can allow the heat to flow through the tip efficiently. Okay, so we've got our solder on here. It's looking good. Now have flipped the board over. Okay, so this is the underside of the board with the legs that need to be desoldered. There's a very thin coating that the manufacturer puts on top of these legs, and we like to call it overfill. It's just a very thin nylon or wax-like substance, depends, every manufacturer is different. And you just simply need to scrape it off so that you can gain access to the actual metal that is underneath. Here we are scraping this substance off. Again, I call it overfill. So we can expose the metal, and then we will add some leaded solder to that. But before we add the leaded solder, we are going to add some flux to these legs, and then we will add the leaded solder. The trick with getting these out efficiently is to add the leaded solder with the flux and just allow your iron to sit there for a minute, allowing that flux and that leaded solder to absorb into the existing solder so that the two solders become one solder, and thereby lowering the overall melting temperature of the new alloy that you have created. This in turn will allow us to utilize our heating gun and lower the board's temperature, increase the board's temperature, and the legs will eventually just drop out of the holes. Here we're adding the solder to the legs. And we're just dabbing it on there for right now. And this is the first hole that we're going to begin to hold the iron. Here's the second. See that? We're just putting the iron inside the hole and wiggling it around. That mixes it. It's almost like you're stirring a pot with a stew. You could think of it that way. And you're trying to get those two alloys to conjoin together which, like I said earlier, creates a new alloy, a lower melting temperature alloy. And once we put our heat gun on this bad boy, we're going to see that thing fall out. Once again, so glad you're with us here today. Please remember to like and subscribe to our video if you are enjoying this content and if you would like to see more content like this. We are grateful to be here, grateful to be making these videos. If you're interested in a repair like this or are in need of a repair like this, you can simply give us a call or come on down to our store. And if you are not located in this area and cannot get to us by car, you can also contact us and ship out a product to us, but first contact us and let us know you are shipping it so that you can provide us with tracking information. But if you do send out something, please contact us first, as well as you will want to put insurance on the product, as we are not responsible for any product shipped by mail that we do not receive. Now we have added the solder to the legs and we are ready to begin the heating process with the heat gun. And right now I'm setting my temperature on the rework station. And I'm going to go ahead and begin warming up the board. I always like to warm the board up and get that temperature up to a nice warm temperature so that we don't thermally shock the board as we begin to apply the heat necessary to drop that port out of that board. Now, many people ask, what temperature do you use? The temperature that needs to be used is based upon the rework station that you're using. The rework station that I'm using only requires me to use 380 degrees based on the alloy that I'm using, and the airspeed is only 30%. However, this will be different air station to air station. So based on your air station, you might require a higher temperature or a lower temperature. So that's something you're going to have to figure out by either using your system or calibrating your system. That's going to be up to you. And I can usually go between 30 to 40% air. Either one is good for a job like this. You know, it's a small board. It doesn't take a lot of air pressure to get this port out. The port itself is small, so we don't have a large thermal area that's consuming a lot of heat. So having said that, just make sure that you don't leave your rework gun pointed at the object without rotating the gun. You want to move the rework gun in a continuous circle so that you do not fry or burn anything on the board. Okay, now we're going to be cleaning off the flux. This looks really good. The port is out, as you can see, and we have a board that is ready to receive a new port. The holes look really, really good. The old solder has come right out. And this is thanks to the leaded solder that we put in. The solder that's in there from the manufacturer is not leaded. And so it has like an extremely high melting point. And so by adding that leaded solder, we lower that overall melting point, thereby enabling that port to just drop right out. Okay, so we're flipping the board over and we're going to begin cleaning the solder from this side of the board. And once we get that solder clean from this side of the board, we can then find the right port that's going to fit. Now we have a few ports in stock. We don't always have the exact port for the Kindle. So we use the one that works best for this particular model. As I was saying earlier, these Kindles have different layouts and configurations, and so we don't always have the exact port, but we usually will have one that's very, very close. In fact, so close that the end user is unable to tell. And so, as long as the port is functionally usable and delivers the electrons through itself correctly, and this is generally done via the pin layout. As long as that pin layout is correct, then that Kindle will work, and the layout of the port will only matter if you are unable to close the chassis, the housing around the port. So it needs to be in the right configuration, but the layout itself can be altered by the technician. So it is not mandatory that you use a specific port, and anybody that says you must is somebody that is just simply not speaking correctly. You don't need to do anything any kind of a way. In the world that we live in, things are done as necessary. In a perfect world, it would be great to use the exact one, but we do not live in a perfect world. The world we live in requires us to adapt. And as technicians, one of the things we learn how to do is to adapt. And in this case, we are going to be adapting to the board and the board's layout. You're going to see this in real time here in a minute, and I will point that out to you. The port that we end up using is a perfectly good port that's used on other Kindles, similar to this one, but it is not exactly the same port, but it is darn close. And looking at it from the outside, you would not be able to tell, and by the way it charges, you're not able to tell, and by the housing and configuration, you're not able to tell. So here's the first one we're trying. Now this one, you can see the two outer legs, not the inner legs, but the outer legs. They do not fit. The inner legs do, but the outer legs, they're too wide. Now this goes to a different Kindle altogether. So we're going to go ahead and grab another port, and it does have the smaller leg configuration. So we're going to go ahead and drop that in, and we will see the difference here in a minute. So let's go ahead and get rid of this wider leg port, and let's introduce a new thinner leg port. And as I was saying, look at that. It's not the exact, but boy, you would never be able to tell, would you? Look at that. It is so close to the original. And this is what I'm talking about, adapting. If you can make it work, make it work. Do what you got to do to make the customer happy, to give them a usable product again, and to keep this device from going into the landfill. This customer should get many more years of use out of this, assuming they take care of that port, that is. All right, we're going to go ahead and start heating up these legs. Right now, in the beginning, we're just going to warm the legs up. We're actually not doing any real soldering. We're doing something called tinning. We're just adding some leaded solder to the legs. And we're just going to go back and forth kind of slowly, adding solder. This is a very small port, and so we're using a micro pencil to do this soldering. This is all done under a microscope. And so we take our time. We do it slowly so that we keep all of the solder on each individual leg. And if we happen to bridge any of the pins, we'll add some plugs, and then we'll work the bridge out, and then we'll continue. But this allows us to get the solder on each pin individually and put some heat on the pins, allowing the pin and the solder underneath on the pad to melt together. We're just going to go over these little by little, as you're seeing, slowly heating up the legs, or the pins rather. And we're just going to work our way down one at a time. And then I'm going to be dabbing on the end. You'll see me start to dab on the ends. And this is to get the solder that is under the pin to melt and join up with the newly added solder that's on the other side, because it will wrap around. And when you use this method of wrapping the solder around the pin, I find, in my experience, you get a much stronger joint. Whereas if I wasn't to add solder to the leg and I was just to set my iron on it and heat the pin into the existing solder, right, you're not going to get this wraparound effect, which adds strength and durability to the port. If I was to just heat it without doing this wraparound effect, the port would be much easier to come off. It would just break off very easy, adding a little bit of force. But using this method allows a very strong bond between the pad and the pin on the port. And you could see you cannot even budge. I am pushing on those, and you cannot budge those pins. You can't budge them. To get those to come off, you would have to break the pads off the board. So this is a very strong bond. I really like using this. It gives me good confidence in my work and in my job. And we'll continue using this method versus just setting it down. Now, there are some ports that I am not able to do this on, and one of those is going to be the Nintendo Switch, which has 2 rows of pins, one on the outside and one on the inside. The row of pins that's on the inside is underneath that port, and so we are unable to go underneath the port. We have to heat it from the outside. We have to get the actual port up to temperature, and we know that the board is up to temperature, and we know that the outer legs are hot and the solder is melting, and that's how we know the inner legs are melted. But in this case, we actually can get to those pins and utilize this method of wrapping that solder around the pins, which gives us a much stronger bond. So in cases like this, you will see me use this method. But in the case like the Switch, we cannot use this method on the inner pins. Okay. Right now, we're going to go ahead and clean it all up on this side. The soldering pretty much is done on this side, so we're just going to let it cool down and clean it up, give it a nice good cleaning, and then we'll begin the assembly process. And after the assembly process, we'll begin to test the port. So far, I'm very happy and very satisfied with this repair, satisfied with the way that it's going, and couldn't ask for more. I really thought that I was going to have to order the port, but after looking through my ports, I was able to find one that did fit. So I'm very happy about that. And the customer's happy too, because they were able to get their Kindle Fire back rather quickly. Okay. So once we're done cleaning this up, like I said, we're going to go ahead and put this flipping over, and we are going to do the legs. Now the legs we do in a similar fashion. We put flux on the legs. Each leg gets flux, and each leg will get some solder added to it. And I allow the solder to flow through the hole and on the leg and through the board, giving it a very good solid bond inside the board in the hole. And you're going to see that here in a minute, my technique that I use for that. It works very effectively. I don't get devices coming back where they've been broke again because of the solder. They're always broke because of the devices either dropped or, And generally, when devices come back after I've soldered it, the pads will get pulled because of the strength of the solder and my technique. So let's go ahead and add some flux to these legs. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start with this one right here and add some solder to it. Heat it up, get that solder in there. Like I said, the goal is to get the solder to go through the hole, not just on top of the hole. We don't want it just sitting on top. We want it to go in the hole and through the hole so that it's coming out the other side. This is the goal. And when this is done correctly, you have a very strong bond between the metals and the alloy. Okay, we're already on number 2. Going back and forth between 1 and 2. Now we're going to start on the other side. Okay, we're going to get those in view so you can see it. Adding some flux to each of the holes. Okay, now we're going to start with this one here. Going to add our solder, let it sit there for a minute. There you go. That looks really good. Getting some good heat action going there. This one looks really good as well. I'm really happy with these. And you will see why once we flip this board over. What's going to happen is the solder will have gone through the board and will be gripping the legs as they come out of the other side of the board. And that's what I like to see. That's what lets me know that this board is in really solid. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start the cleaning process. We want to get the flux off of the board and flip the board back over. That's when we're going to be able to take a look at our work and see how well the solder went through the holes and onto the legs, onto the other side of the board. Okay, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. Please forgive me. So, clean it up a little bit more here. This is not the final cleaning. This is just a basic cleaning. We're going to clean the board at the very end of the job. Once the port is tested, um, and we know everything's good, we're going to clean it again. So this is just an initial cleaning to keep the area clear and clean so that the flux doesn't get hard. If you leave the flux and it gets hard, it's much more difficult to clean than if you just do a basic wipe down right now. Okay, so what we're doing right now is we're just warming up the area that we just cleaned, and we're using isopropyl alcohol, Q-tips. We're just going over the area a couple of times, and the heat allows the board to stay warm as we are cleaning it, thereby allowing the flux to stay molten while we clean it, so that it's easier to clean and the flux is gathered into the Q-tip much easier. And so that is the reason for the process that you're looking at. There are times where you will see me use a brush. I use different brushes for different cleaning procedures. This one is a much smaller area. It doesn't require using brushes and things like that. If I can just get away with using a Q-tip, I will. But some situations require a brush, particularly when you're trying to get in between various components. You'll need a brush, and you'll need to keep the board warm so the flux continues to move, and then the bristles from the brush will move between the components, allowing the flux to come out and get captured by either a Q-tip or other type of fiber cloth that you might use. We use different types of fiber cloth. Just depends, like I said, on the job we're doing. Now look at those legs. See how the solder is like reaching through the hole and grabbing the leg, and it's following the leg up? That is a very strong bond and is much more difficult to break than the original soldering job that was done. And so this is what I like to do to ensure a high quality bond with those legs. Keep it strong and to make it part of the board. Basically, we're trying to make this thing part of the board so that it's more difficult rather for you to break it than it was originally from the factory. All right, so this is looking good to me. Just going to go between these pins here. Make sure we have no bridging, no flux, no garbage in between there, and that looks good. All right. Very happy about this overall, the overall aesthetics. And look at those pins. Those look nice. And right now I'm just nitpicking. But I just want to make sure to get any residue or anything that might be between there out. Alright, so now that that's done, we're going to go ahead and reassemble this thing. And once it's assembled, we're going to go ahead and give it a test. So here's our LCD. I'm going to go ahead and plug this guy in and see what we get. And there we go. There's our light. So we've got the light, the LEDs, we've got a picture on the screen. It's turning on. Let's wait one more minute, and there you go. It's done. Kindle Fire Charge Port Replacement. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.